Hello, hello, hello. How is everybody? Welcome to another week of our amazing podcast, Through the Line of Jesus. I'm joined here by our guests, Connor and Asha. How are you guys doing?
Good. Excited to be back.
Yes. It's probably
Better,
been
better now. No, I'm just loving you.
Oh, it's week 3.
week 3, but for us, it's been a while since we've recorded. So
Yeah.
it is good to get back to it. I had I got 2 daughters, for those that are new, although I'm sure most people know who I am by now. And I had them all to myself for 4 days, and that went about as well as you could think. All right, so
I
to
think
start,
I would think it would go great.
it went okay, but we started off the first night with Anna being sick and coughing and not falling asleep, so she was grumpy, which made me grumpy. So it was
That's why we wait. That's why we waited so long, so you would be
less grumpy.
not grumpy on the cast.
That was a good call because it's been a good week. All right, we are actually going to start not in Genesis, but we are going to jump over to Hebrews 11, um, because for the rest of, not the rest of, but for a lot of the rest of the characters that we do, we're going to be coming back to Hebrews 11 because Hebrews 11 is called the Hall of Faith. So whoever the author of Hebrews was starts listing off all these examples from the Old Testament, and he's using a lot of the people from the genealogy. Um, so actually, he lists Abel as one of the first people, but then at verse 8, which is where we pick up, oh, he does Noah. So I suppose this was in our reading last week, wasn't it? Or I forgot about it.
I'd have to look at my phone.
But we'll go ahead and read verses 8 through. Oh, he has a big section. 8 through 19.
19.
Mhm.
You guys want to rock, paper, scissors? Who reads that?
You can do it, or do you want to do it? All right, we'll make it more fun. Okay, screw it up. There we go. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock, paper,
They're
scissors,
in
shoot.
sync.
Dang. So
Connor, take it away.
okay, hey, you go. Thank you. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him since she considered him faithful who had promised. Neo 19. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. These all died these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them, and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desired a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God he considered that God was able to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back.
Very nice. So what I find really cool about, especially since this is such a long text, is this kind of gives you a different interpretive lens. If you like read this first and then you read the story, or comparing, like you probably didn't have all those same thoughts that he did. And you're like,
Mhm.
oh, I guess that's one way to interpret it. Um, like one example would be there at the end where he says Abraham just figured that God could raise Isaac back from the dead. If you read Genesis by itself, that's not like said anywhere,
Yeah.
Hmm.
but like that's person who wrote Hebrew, that's like his interpretation of why Abraham was so confident. You could kind of read into it because he tells his servants like me and the boy will come back. So like you can kind of like read between the lines and come up with
Mhm.
that. But it's kind of cool that Paul does this a lot in his letters. You can read that stuff and then it kind of helps you interpret in a different lens what you read in the Old Testament. So I guess first question, did you guys know that there was the Hall of Faith passage, Hebrews 11? Were you aware of that passage before? Or
I didn't know that was called the Hall of Faith, but it makes sense.
yeah, that phrase by faith, and then they list off, and then it goes through all sorts of people. Surprising people get mentioned in there further on. Closed my Bible. Should have kept it open. Um, I want to say Rahab gets mentioned.
I'm looking.
Is it?
So even though, her life before her story, she's a prostitute, she still, her actions are considered really good and faithful that she's mentioned.
Yep, see, there she is. Verse 31.
Yep. And this is really good that it is mentioned here because people who want to interpret the Bible and for whatever agenda, they don't want Rahab to be a prostitute. They're like, oh no, that word could mean something else. No, it's just like a innkeeper or whatever.
Mhm.
But when you have it in the New Testament, now not only do you have it in Hebrew saying it, now you have it in Greek saying it. It's like
Mhm.
you can't keep arguing that. So like
Hmm.
it's really good that we have that sort of stuff. So we'll be coming back to that passage much more. But um, it's a very cool little reading. Hebrews is a tough read, so just being able to tackle one little section of it is nice.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Let's jump back into Genesis. And I think a good spot to start this week on our note sheet is sort of what were some of the personal applications that you kind of drew from Abraham and Sarah's story. And Connor read, so I'll go ahead and give off one and then turn it over to you guys. Um, my first one, and this was a similar idea that I had with Adam, but take a more active leadership role in your family. Whereas you see a lot of times Abraham was just like, "Oh, if you say so, Sarai, okay."
Mhm.
Sometimes he made his own bad decisions, but um, just because someone tells you to do something, you still gotta stand up for yourself. Yeah,
Including your wife.
including
No, I'm
your
just
wife.
kidding.
Throw it to you guys. What was a personal application you guys had? Well,
I'd say from the Sarai standpoint, um, or was she Sarah then? I don't remember. But basically, when Abraham was told that she was going to have kids and or bear a child, and she laughed, and then she bore a child at like what, 90,
99.
99. I think for me, it's more like don't ever, like, if the Lord tells you something or like whatever, just um to not laugh and like take him seriously because he really will do it.
Mhm.
Um,
that is one of my favorite passages because it's like Sarah laughed. He's like, "Why are you laughing?" I didn't laugh. Yes, you did laugh.
yeah.
Story moves on.
Yeah. So I thought
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
Connor.
I think when like and you're in a waiting period for God, I think it's hard to be like, I can't wait any longer. And then you read Genesis 12 to
Mhm.
whatever, 23, and yeah, you can wait. Abraham waited longer than probably anybody. You can
Right.
wait.
Mhm.
I forget how many years was it? I knew
40,
this once.
is it?
That seems a bit long. Since the
Uh,
original promise of having you would have kids. I knew it at one
Well, didn't
point.
they have him? He was 100 and she was 99.
he started at 75, right? So was it
Yeah,
25?
yeah, it was 25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Half a quarter of a century waiting.
Mhm.
So that's
Hmm.
you guys are barely past a quarter of a century of living. So
Just a little
wait
bit.
your whole life
And some change.
and some change. So yeah, I put God has long-term plans. I mean, certainly there's examples of him doing things immediately, but
Yeah.
um, I've definitely seen that in my life. It's not like there's been one moment that's been like, and that changed everything, but it's like um, pushes that I had years ago to take this direction, and this is the way you should do it. And it's like put me in tough situations at the time, but down the road, it's like, boy, that glad that happened. Look where I'm
Mhm.
going now. And each time, it just like, hey, that's better. That's better. Hey, this is better. And it's like
Yeah.
Mhm.
none of that happens without that first initial testing period.
Mhm.
So,
I had somebody text me today. There's like, I was asking him how he was doing,
mhm,
and he asked me how I was doing, and I kind of told him the update, and he's like, "Yeah, you know what? Usually God, when He puts you in a spot that you're not wanting to be, is when the most growth happens." I'm
mhm.
like, "That's a good reminder. That's a great reminder."
I would have loved that if I heard that when I wasn't being tested.
Mhm.
It's hard to take that in when you're in a testing period,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but that's
It's cool
good.
though to look back on
Mhm.
Hmm.
once you're out of that period.
Yeah.
Then you're like, remember when we were there? And then you see where God was, which is really cool. But it's
Hmm.
kind of hard to see when you're in it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I hear you. My kind of lined up with what you guys were saying. Like Asha's, so mine that was similar to yours was trusting God's promise and His timing. Um, was kind of my version of what you had said, Asha. So,
Mhm.
and then also one that I had is learn to recognize the voice of God.
Right.
Like Abraham, he definitely knew he heard God because of what he was willing to do with Isaac. He's
Mhm.
like, no, that's God. Whereas if I'd be questioning every second of like,
Yeah.
mm,
Mhm.
gonna assume not. So
Mhm.
trying to build that recognition.
Our last one was kind of like, even when it seems impossible or scary, have faith, because it said that because of um his belief, God committed it as righteousness, or
Hmm.
I think that's what it said. So like
I think
that,
that's from Paul, right? Oh,
it was in this. Was it Acts? I don't know. It was either the
oh
Acts
yeah,
part
yeah, yeah, yeah.
or it was in the Genesis part. But
I think it's mentioned a few times. So in Stephen's speech,
yes,
he
there you go.
mentions
Mhm.
it. I think Paul in Galatians, I think even references it by saying um, that God credited it to him as righteousness, that
Yeah.
he had faith. And that, so it's sort of a whole accountability thing. Like Abraham didn't have a Bible. There was
Mhm.
no Bible then. Probably
Mhm.
wasn't even writing then. I think writing came around the time of Moses. So, he doesn't have what we have, but God tells him something and he goes, that's God. And he
Mhm.
like listens and like, so that's what his faith looked like.
Yeah.
Whereas Christians, it's both a blessing and a responsibility because
Mhm.
God speaks to us. We
Mhm.
just got to read it. We've been hyping up Abraham a lot. Let's go backwards and what are some of his weaknesses before we keep hyping him up with strengths? and then we'll dive into some specific stories.
Mm, I'd say, well, we have cowardly on here, but I would
Hmm.
say like a weakness to me that I saw was when God first told them that they were gonna have a son,
Hmm.
and then Sarai.
You can say Sarah.
Okay, Sarah was
There.
like, "Yeah, not me. Like, not at this
Mm-hmm.
age. Take my servant."
Hmm.
And he just was like, "All right."
Yeah.
Like, there was no like, if God told me I was gonna have a son,
Hmm.
why would I not think it would be with my wife? Why would I have to go? Like, he
Right.
didn't question it.
Yeah.
He just was like, "Okay." So,
Yeah, it makes you wonder because there is that event, and then there's I think twice where they go to Egypt, and then once with Abimelech where he's like, "No, that's not my wife, that's my sister," and puts
mm-hmm.
her in a precarious spot, and it makes you wonder like if they didn't make those dumb decisions, would God have given them a son sooner?
Yeah.
Oh,
As opposed to like, he's not going to give him a kid right after they leave Egypt. And now there's the question of like, oh, was it the Pharaoh's kid? Or, he doesn't want to do
Mm-hmm.
that. So, what was, did they have to wait longer because of those poor
also,
decisions?
how beautiful did Sarah have to be
Right.
70 something?
It's,
You're like,
she's gorgeous. Yep.
she hasn't aged a day.
I think that every time I read the story, I'm like, okay. I loved also that not loved, but this is one of his weaknesses that he's using technicalities as a crutch. Where when he lies about her being his sister, if you look at the genealogy, technically she's a half sister.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, well, technically she is my sister. It's like, oh my gosh, dude. Um, and what's funny is we'll read a similar story with Isaac. He does the same thing, but there's
Yeah.
no like, that's not your sister. That's your distant cousin. Like, good try.
Mm-hmm.
But Um, and then his biggest error was definitely how they treated Hagar.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I've always looked at it as like a bad story, but then um, I think it's a very intentional purpose why that story is included. Do you know what the name Hagar means?
Did we look this up?
No, we looked up Negeb. They said they went out to the Negeb. Like, what in the world is that?
Yeah,
Hagar. Oof. No,
Hagar means immigrant,
Mm.
and
must have missed
so
that in the bonus episode.
no, I didn't. This is from Bible Project.
Gotcha.
But when you read later on, there's lots of laws about how you are to treat immigrants and those in your land correctly. So here's an example of him breaking a lot of those laws and being so treating an immigrant poorly.
Yeah.
Um, so even though Abraham is looked upon as like the leader of the nation, um, he's not perfect. Um, so, but he does have strengths. We don't have to beat him down too much. I've got that he was humble, obedient, trusting, righteous, courageous at times.
Mhm.
That I
So,
put there. Genesis 18. Um, I said that he's tricky. I don't know why I said that. That might have been a weakness. I'm trying to make sure.
um,
In
and
Genesis 18.
I know he negotiates with God, trying to. Can you
Oh
just?
yeah, for like Sodom and Gomorrah. He's like, hey
Yeah,
God, can you just save him if there's like 50 people? God, don't be mad at me. But how about like 40 people? 30 people? Like he just keeps going
going.
down. Like God knows. Duh. Like I don't know why God was like, hey, how about for Lot? I just won't kill Lot. Like
But yeah, it's funny is God never stops him, and there's no sign that he would have stopped.
yeah.
And yet Abraham's like, "Whew, I got to 10. Great," and he thinks that's the best he could do. It's like he probably could have gone further.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, So I think that's funny. But it's a very interesting story. It's one of many in the Bible of a righteous person, and this is one of my foreshadowing, so kind of jump into that, but where a righteous person is um, pleading for mercy with God for other people. You
Hmm.
see this at the end of Job. Job has to pray on behalf of all of his friends to keep the wrath from there. The prophets, that's a lot. It's what Jesus does on the cross. Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So that's the theme that'll pop up a lot.
That could kind of also go back into your personal application. It's like,
Hmm.
hey, like if you like work on like being righteous,
Hmm.
not that like I don't feel like your righteousness is what solves
Right.
like everybody's problems when you pray for them, but like I think God, I don't know.
Well, we would be relying on the righteousness of Jesus in
Okay,
those prayers.
that makes more sense.
But I think there would still be I think we would take from this as still a lesson of, hey, let me live my life right.
Hmm.
And as you live your life right, that puts in you the heart to do things like that, like to pray
Yeah.
for people that, like, I don't think Abraham had any love for Sodom and Gomorrah, but he's just like, hey, when you're living righteously, you go, that's people. Those are human beings. And
Yeah.
yeah. So, any stories stick out to you guys? Let's kind of jump through Abraham's life, some different stories, questions, and fun facts, and there's plenty to talk about
Hmm?
if I need to.
Oh, well, something that stuck out to me as we were reading was I feel like each the last two that we've done,
Mhm.
like it always says be fruitful and multiply, or you will like be fruitful and I'll multiply your offspring or whatever. And I just kind of said, man, God really loves his fruit. Um, but I don't think I've ever noticed that like as much in
Mhm.
the Bible, how often he says that. And so I just thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. It makes sense at the time of Noah. Like,
Hmm.
hey,
Yeah.
repopulate, come on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still a call up to Abraham. I think a lot of people take that as a call still to this day. You see Catholics have lots and lots and lots of kids. Jews would have lots and lots of kids. Some denominations of Christians, same. Less so in modern times, but
Hmm.
um, I'm all for having lots and lots of kids, but that's a discussion I gotta try to win.
Is there a reason why they mention like God, like they mention God's promise to Abraham like 1,000 times in his story? Like as you read through, it's like, okay, why they keep repeating this? Like, do you have a
Yeah. I bet it's mentioned a specific number of times, like
yeah?
seven or something like that. Um,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
quick.
it could be definitely like a literary device that the Hebrews used, but like I don't know any of those kind of things, like how they tend to write or what the purpose of doing that was for. I just thought maybe you'd know.
That's not one that I've got off my top of my head, but this is a great for those listening. When you got those questions, I always recommend as you're doing your notes. Um, I don't have a spot on here for questions. My other studies, questions is like right at the top because what I teach is write down questions as you do your reading, and then you can have a whole separate study just by going and trying to find answers to your questions.
Hmm.
So, how many times did God promise Abraham? God made four promises. No, that's four promises. Mm, We'll have to research that later. If I
Okay.
find a cool answer, I'll uh, I'll do a bonus episode.
Hmm.
But there's probably some literary devices. Here, yeah. What do you guys think of Melchizedek?
Melchizedek, where's he at again?
So I'll set the stage while you kind of refresh. But so Lot gets taken. So It goes into a story about all these kings going to war. Sodom and Gomorrah gets attacked. Lot and his family get brought away. Abraham catches wind of it and he grabs his mini army and they just go and they whoop them. So, and then it's like, wow, there you go. And then he brings them all back. Um, Abraham is approached by two different kings. The first is the king, probably the king of Sodom, or at least one of those kings that he just got all the stuff for. And that king was like trying to offer him, like, hey, or take this stuff and all this stuff. And Abraham will have none of it because you actually see this a lot in these Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Especially Abraham, the refusal to take any money from anybody because then later on they're going to take credit and be like, he's successful because I gave him such and such. So you always see him like when he's trying to argue for the burial ground. He doesn't want it for free. He's going to pay for it. Um, so he denies that king and says, nope, not taking any of your money. But then Melchizedek comes along and he accepts the gifts from him. And then he actually gives a tithe. The first time there's a tithe mentioned in the Bible to Melchizedek. And Melchizedek blesses him. And it's not clear, it's not stated specifically, but they do this little. He meets up with him in this valley, and it gives the name of the valley, and that's the valley that goes right past Jerusalem. So Melchizedek was the king priest of basically Jerusalem before it was Jerusalem, Proto Jerusalem. So very cool. But have you guys heard of Melchizedek before, or is this kind of a
This is this is the first, but his name is
okay?
kind of hard to memorize.
Oh yeah,
It's one of
I
those.
don't read it. I just memorize it. It's Melchizedek,
Yeah,
and then if I try to read it, I don't,
Mhm.
Melchizedek.
yeah. So what's interesting about him is he gets this really brief mention. Abraham like treats him super well. He ties to him, which is really strange. And then it's like, boop, that's all you get. And
Mhm.
so it created a bunch of Jewish literature and ideas about this person. And actually, when you read, I think it's in Hebrews, pretty sure it's Hebrews, he uses Melchizedek as like an example of how Jesus isn't just like some new high priest that's in the same priestly Levite lineage. He's a priest, and he says in the order of Melchizedek, basically because it's like it's not based off of like this lineage of parental passage and
Mhm.
um, some people even point to Melchizedek as a pre-incarnate Jesus. I'm not sure I fully buy into that one, but that's some people's interpretation. So there's a lot of interesting stuff on him for those that love to dig into some interesting things. So there you go.
Just rereading parts of it.
Yep. His name means my king is righteous. What his name means.
Mhm.
Is he the king or he's just the
He's a
priest?
king priest.
Huh.
He's
The
described as
Pope.
both. Yeah. So that's another. It's just like very interesting. It's like he's a king priest, and you're like, who else is a king priest? Oh, Jesus is a king.
Mm-hmm.
This is so interesting. He has no origin story. There's no record of him dying. It's just like this is a very interesting dude. And so they came up with all sorts of different stories about him. And obviously the New Testament writers were kind of aware of that and kind of use him to explain a point. So it's very interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah. What she have? Um, I think we probably need to talk about the story of him going up to sacrifice Isaac.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that would be 22, 3, or 3. I like what you said that he told his servants that him and his son would be right back. that I never thought about that. And I kind of read over that part.
Yep.
Um, 22, that's where it's at. Okay. Um, and then the angel of the Lord called to him. And I've heard that, I don't know if we've talked about this already, but when the angel of the Lord comes, some people say that could be Jesus.
Uh,
It's called a
sometimes it's
prophet
just
or something.
mentioned. Sometimes it's just was this one, does your Bible say a angel or the angel?
The
Yeah. So you get a lot of stories where it mentions the angel of the Lord,
mhm.
and then the story is just riddled with blending the angel of the Lord with God.
Yeah.
And
So when reading this one, it has like it speaks kind of like using God's pronouns, mixing it up a little bit. So
mhm,
that's what like, especially in I think it's Judges, the angel of the Lord shows up and he's using both mixtures of God and
yeah,
he will,
him
and
and
then
Gideon.
he changes to I, like things
Yep.
like change. So that's when like you kind of like, okay, well maybe this isn't just an angel.
hmm
Mhm.
So um it's kind of interesting the angel of the Lord shows up and if that is Jesus, because the parallel between sacrificing his son and the Jesus sacrifice,
Foreshadow.
yeah, it's like a
So do you
foreshadowing.
guys know where they're doing the sacrifice at?
Not, no way, it's the same spot. For
So
real?
and this story just says Mount Moriah,
Yeah.
but that is the in Jerusalem. So I don't know if it's like on the same hill where the cross is, but
Oh,
like they're in the same location
Mm-hmm.
that later on Jesus does the same, giving up his life.
Mm-hmm.
When I learned that, I'm like, why don't they teach people this?
Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
crazy.
oh my
I'm
gosh.
I'm going
Because
down
like
the
they could have done this sacrifice anywhere, but they go on a how long of a journey?
3 days.
A 3-day journey.
Okay,
dang.
yeah.
So Isaac's as good as dead for 3 days, and then he's brought back to life.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all there.
That's crazy.
Where'd they
Yeah.
come from?
I mean,
Like if they were coming from the same spot Jesus went came from too, that'd be kind of crazy too.
probably not. It
Probably not.
describes there's a specific tree that they keep mentioning that like Abraham pretty much chills at.
Yeah.
I think it's more south, so I think they went. At least this is what's in my head. I think they
Yeah.
were more south than they went north. But regardless, there's enough there for just any Christian to go, wow, like
Mm-hmm.
it's just so cool.
I've been getting down the YouTube rabbit hole of watching Christian archaeologists slash whatever those guys are
hmm
that like go find the actual like places and stuff.
hmm
And maybe Abraham is a little bit too far back to find some of this stuff,
Yeah.
but like that's crazy.
Well, that and he lived in tents.
Yeah,
So like, what are you gonna find?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, you can get some stuff. I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Hmm.
Talked about as happening during his time, and there's archaeological evidence or geographical evidence that something big exploded there.
Yeah.
So you
Mm-hmm.
can find some stuff, but like that's what you're gonna find.
Yeah.
Um,
Didn't it say it fire? It
Rain down.
rained.
rain down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, let me have you Google.
Me
And
Google.
for those listening, Google, let's see here. Oh, gotta look up the name because it's the over Russian. I'll cut out this. So look up the Tunguska event.
Um,
Tunguska. The Tunguska event. And then just look at images. And so this is an example. So those listening, you can look up the Tunguska event. This is an example of what happens when a meteorite Yeah. No, that's probably just like a artist rendering. They didn't capture
Well,
it.
yeah.
But you can see how the trees are just leveled, how there's a giant bare spot still to this day. Um, so sometimes meteors will come and they'll hit the ground and you get the crater, but sometimes they explode, and I mean just the devastation is just like just rips through everything.
So like the crater that's there, I'll show that this
Yeah,
image. Um, the reason like I don't know how long ago the Tunguska event
more
happened.
recent.
Recent? Okay.
Yeah,
Well, like the reason there's no trees there still is because of like the salt and sulfur just like changing the oil or the
it may
soil.
just be that it blew away like any possible seeds or anything,
I mean
because there's
that
grass. But
too, but like
that's the argument for Sodom and Gomorrah
yeah,
and the Dead Sea that's there now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. So there's another YouTube rabbit trail to run down. Your better half disappeared.
Yeah. She'll be back. Disappeared. She didn't like Google like that.
Yep.
Just kidding.
I feel like there was something else with the oh, so talking about the Abraham Isaac story, you know, we may be talking about Abraham, but like when we talk about Isaac, I mean he willingly went to the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Um, and if he would have been the one carrying the wood for the altar. So there's like the image of
Oh my
Jesus
God.
carrying the cross.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the story just goes crazy
But what I
when you
thought
think about
about
this.
was that he had to wait so many years for his son.
Yeah.
The Israelites had to wait so many years for the son. And
Hmm.
like, there's just a lot of parallels.
Yeah, and you can think about like the grief that Abraham would have, you've waited for this promise and now you're going to have to kill your own son. Like, and
Mm,
that's just like a fraction of like God had to do that.
yeah.
And like we can like poo-poo it and just say like, well, he came back from the dead, but it's like, well, I mean, there is still pain, there is still suffering,
Uh-huh.
and Jesus knew that. So,
Like, in talking about Jesus, God still had to watch him get like whipped. And
yeah.
I've heard so many different like accounts of how badly, but
Hmm.
like so much so that his ribs were showing, like all that stuff.
Psalm 22,
Yeah,
you
I'll have to read
know,
that. I'll read
that's
that.
my favorite psalm, and it's so prophetic.
Hmm.
Yeah, Psalm 22. So it's written by David. It's supposed to be about David when he was out running away from Solomon, but you start reading it and you're like, I don't remember that happening to David. Like his arms weren't pulled out of socket, but it like describes all these things and you're like, well, that's Jesus. Man, that's
Hmm.
Jesus. Actually, you don't have to go look it up now because when we get to David, that's part of our reading.
Oh,
So we'll
okay.
get there.
I won't spoil then.
Don't spoil it. It's the bomb. Trying to
Don't read that
remember.
part of your Bible.
Okay, and for those of you that did the Mark series with us, I think there was an episode where Kaylee and I talked about it. So, oh yeah, I did have it written down. 25 years of waiting. So he get the name Abraham means exalted father. Sorry, Abram means exalted father. Abraham means father of many.
Hmm. What does
Even though
what does exalted mean for the people at home that don't know?
uh lifted up,
Okay.
um that's the literal meaning to exalt.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
the more you would picture that more metaphorical, like you are more important, you
Okay.
are higher.
That's a weird
Yeah,
name for somebody for like 75 years to have a name like that, you know.
I'm sure so is Jared, so is Connor.
Like, yeah, it's true. Um,
Can't wait till I'm 75 and I get to change my name.
there later it talks about is it in Genesis 25? Um, Abraham then having another wife.
Oh yeah, yep.
They just kind
Uh,
of tossed in all those names too. What do you think?
well, so this is a great thing. I mean, there's whole people that dedicate their whole life
Yeah,
studies to looking at these names. Um, and as I've done more and more studies and listening to other people,
yeah,
like the names start to mean more.
yeah.
Um, so like um, some of the names. So I think one of those names mentioned where Abraham fathers all these peoples.
Yeah.
One of them that's mentioned comes up again in the story of Joseph. The people that they sell him to is one
Gotcha.
of those descendants. So like they were distant relatives that they sold him off to.
Gotcha.
Um, so sometimes things like that pop back up, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. In fact, my wife last night was asking me because she's doing her Bible study and she's reading Psalms. And as you get further on the songs, you get a group of Psalms that are written by the sons of Korah. She's like, who are
Hmm.
the sons of Korah? I was like, oh, I'm so glad you asked because I think it's Numbers, there's a whole story about this guy Korah and he does a stupid thing and his whole family gets wiped out. It seems like his
Oh,
whole family gets wiped out, like the earth eats him.
he's the guy that keeps like the gold and hides it under his rug. Is it?
No, not that guy. Korah is the one he tried to challenge Aaron's for his position.
Gotcha.
So there's this whole thing. He ends up getting swallowed up by the earth,
It's crazy.
which is a crazy story. And it even says like all of his family. And so you're like, oh, that's the end of his line. But then you get these sons of Korah later on. So it's like, oh,
Huh.
there's a remnant from his family line, and they turned out good. So it's like a nice little redemption story. I'm like, yes. So
Don't eat me.
so as you dig in the Bible more, sometimes these names you start to build those connections, and
Yeah.
it doesn't change Christianity. It just makes you appreciate this book a whole lot more.
One thing I learned recently to kind of date this podcast would be that like I heard of someone speak saying that like these names being listed here kind of like prove its authenticity for the time period of when it was written.
Hmm.
So like they take these names, like I'm gonna read through like Keturah, Sheborhim, Zimram, Joksham, Midian, Ishbak, and Shura. Those names might have been popular and like around,
Yeah,
I guess, Israel at that time, which kind of like supports the authenticity of this part of the Bible. And the person I listened to said that the Bible gets it right
yeah, all the
the
time.
entire time.
I
It's
haven't
just
looked into like these Old Testament names, but
yeah,
I know um, when they look into the names. So I learned this because of the Mark series,
yeah,
but one of the claims skeptics would say is Mark is writing from Rome. He made it
mhm,
all up. He'd never even gone to Jerusalem. This is all just later propaganda, and they're making things up. But when you look at the names used for all these characters that happen in the Gospels,
mhm,
and you compare it to what the names were popular at the time by looking at um, headstones and different receipts, like it
yeah,
matches up. Mary was a super common name.
yeah,
Judah was a very common name, or Judas, as it would have been.
yeah,
Jesus was a fairly common name. Simon, and the practice of having multiple names or a different way to distinguish yourself past your first name was super
yeah.
common. So it all makes sense. Yep. Evidence for the Bible, people. It's crazy. If you're not believing it, check your heart. So, oh, that's hilarious. I just realized that. Oh, that in your key verses, is there a little text at the bottom of it?
I have to look at my phone.
It's,
I know, but he's looking,
uh,
what he gave us.
I don't know if I've updated it.
I don't have it.
Okay,
mm,
and I changed it. I had somebody in my small group who, as we're going through this, he'd be like, "Man, Jared, you're having us do a lot of reading," which I interpreted as you tried to cram this last minute. Because if you space it out over a week, it's really not that much.
Mhm.
So,
Let's listen to it at 1.5
or listen
speed,
to
bro.
it. Yeah, you'll be fine.
Hey.
Um, what's interesting as you read the story more, you realize that a lot of Abraham's problems are kind of foreshadowed from the get-go.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's he gets told, Abraham, take you and your wife and head out to this land. The next verse. So Abraham took his wife and Lot. It's like he didn't tell you to take Lot.
Was Lot is
So
he related?
Lot's dad. So Lot's his nephew, Abraham's
Okay.
nephew, but it talks about how his dad had died. So
Yeah.
Abraham had two brothers. One died. That was Lot's dad. So Abraham kind of adopted Lot.
Gotcha.
The other brother died while in. Well, maybe no. They're just the one that died. So,
It
but you
did
kind of
say
get
that.
this. So that's kind of like a hint, like, Abraham, you kind of did what you weren't supposed to do. And then as you read more, Lot just causes problems. There's problems because they are competing for space. There's problems because he has to go save him. There's
Mhm.
so you kind of get little hints, and the Bible doesn't just say like, and he shouldn't have done that, but you can kind of like read between the lines. I forget which verses it was, but God's like, go and tour this whole land that I'll give to you. And it talks like, and so Abraham went up and it like stopped halfway and he was like, yeah, this is great. Instead of doing the whole tour of the land, you're like,
Yeah.
Abraham, you still didn't listen.
Yeah.
So there's little hints here and there that's like, come on, Abraham.
I can't find where it said it, but it said that if Abraham didn't have a son, his inheritance would go to this
Mhm.
person. I don't remember who it was.
And one, it goes to his, he's like his head servant
Okay.
and you can't prove it, but this is probably the guy that he sent off to go find Isaac a wife. So
Okay.
that story where he goes off, finds the Rachel at the well,
Yeah.
that's probably the guy.
Gotcha.
So, which I mean, he's a pretty incredible guy. So
And
we'll read about him next week.
biblical wingman.
Biblical wingman. Um, cool. I think I'm out of stuff. I'm checking my notes.
Is there in the Hebrew, do we ever talk about this? The lots of like threes, the numbers, and like they use a lot of the number three in this section of Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think just noticed that. And I don't know if it's like because three is a holy number or it was just a way that the Hebrew writer was trying to.
It's so we just see it as like a number thing, but
Yeah,
it's probably more of a symmetry memorized thing.
gotcha.
Mm.
I've got to remember a lot of these early stories would have been um, told verbally up until it got written down. Um, but even once they got written down, you can tell that there's just so much symmetry and wordplay and all this stuff going on
Mhm.
that they're very strategic in how they were writing things out. Again, because you might have it written down, but that doesn't mean everybody knows how to read. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean
Mhm.
everyone has a copy. So you're trying to make things that are memorable. And I have a bonus episode that I did during Mark about what are they called? Chiasms. And chiasms are a type of symmetry that you see throughout the whole Bible. New Testament uses it, Old Testament uses it, but it's like the point here, like you're telling a story, climax, and then the other side matches the side that's
Mhm.
going there. The Sermon on the Mount, so like their main point is in the middle, whereas when we tell stories, the climax is like at the end. Theirs is more in the middle. To get a good example, and what you see across the two sides is a lot of, sorry, my hands are too low. What you see across the two sides are like similar words or ideas that match up.
Mhm.
So if you actually look at the Sermon on the Mount, that whole Sermon on the Mount is a chiasm, and right at the top is the Lord's Prayer. So, and so that's how you get like 3s and 7s are
Gotcha.
important numbers because you have that
Repeating
central
numbers.
point.
Gotcha.
For those that want to dig into that more, I think I've mentioned this before, but go into Bible Project's classroom, and what they do is they organize passages. Both they'll highlight the key words, and they'll, even if it's like we translate it differently, they'll put the original Hebrew so you can see that they're the same. And they even structured the paragraph so it's easier to see the symmetry. And so you can kind of get the feeling of like, wow, this was like a lot of thought went into how they created it. I'm super passionate about that because, so for those that don't know, my current role is a curriculum coordinator for science for a district. And so I take all these resources, and what I do is I organize it for the teachers in a like really smart, strategic way, makes it more useful. And so when I learn about how organized the Bible is, I'm like, I get it. Like that's what I do. So you have like some scribes that are piecing this all together to make it all make sense, whether that was Moses or Joshua or someone later on. That I don't really care. It's just beautiful, and you get a lot out of it. Awesome.
I think there more came out of this than I was expecting.
Dig deep.
I was just like, okay, it's a lot of repeated stuff. Let me try to dig in here. There's some stuff that I thought was cool, and then I'm like, dang, we have like whole 30 minutes of
And then
just
I come along and I go, and the story of Isaac going to the mountain and all the symmetry and the foreshadowing. Yep, it just gets better. Just gets better. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. We're looking forward to next week. We got Isaac and then Jacob after that. Some good stories coming up. All right. Thank you guys so much. See you in the next video. Bye.